we're going back a little bit to talk about David Berman and the Purple Mountains record. Even if David Berman hadn't passed away since that album has been released, even if that hadn't happened, I still think I would have wanted to talk about that album because I think it's something amazing will have to come out for any record to be higher on the list for me than that record. That's I think going to be my record of the year. And I was fairly well into the Silver Jews. I was enough of a fan that I saw them twice, including that first tour. I think I flew to Columbus, Ohio. Hey, there you go, Columbus,
Yep.
Ohio. I think when David Berman was only doing tours like nights within a drive of Nashville. So I went to see him in Columbus, Ohio. I brought along some friends who had no idea who he was or that it was, like why it was a big deal, why there was a line of people on a whatever Tuesday night outside the bar, and they all walked out totally converted. And they aren't even like snarky alternative like indie fans at all. They're just they're normies. And they walked out like, wow, that was great. And they said that because it was great. It was just great. And so, I thought actually the last couple albums weren't as great, but he was stable and he was doing that thing that he does. And then, his book was good too. And I don't know. I don't know if I would have guessed for him to be suicide at all. But the fact that he chose to do that like right before the tour for this album is really, really sad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it possible that he just didn't want to go on tour,
Well, so he took a long hiatus from music, and the thing about this album is I don't know, if you would really assume that he wrote this gradually, or if these were songs that he wrote in like a quick burst at all.
I don't know. I have I haven't gone to read a ton. To be honest, it's a very depressing thing to go read about it now. You know what I mean? It's a
Yeah.
really depressing thing. Uh, I, I should go back and reread all the history of how this album came out. I think it's on Drag City Records. At first I think there were just a couple 7-inch singles that were out. If you haven't heard the remix, there's one of the B-sides or one of those original singles has exclusives as B-sides, and you have to seek them out. One of them is an absolutely spot on, perfect bastardization of like white reggae. Where they literally just it makes it sound like David Berman is singing in some like horrible cruise horrible cruise ship or something like this. The All My Happiness Is Gone is the name of the happiness is wrong rather. It's the Noah Count. That's hilarious. Oh my god. I didn't catch the entendre there. The Noah Count remix, please look that up. It's that alone. I knew when I heard that, I'm like, oh wow, this tour is going to be great. This album is going to be great, and sure enough, it absolutely is. And there's not really a dud on it. You can't say that about every Silver Jews record. There's some duds. There's some times it gets a little cringy or they try too hard. There's not one of those on this.
That's why I wonder if this was sort of gradual or in a quick burst, because it is so strong and you don't know if it's the product of, maybe he did this over the course of all those years he took off. Whatever the case, it is a very strong collection of songs.
Yeah. It's a really sad thing to listen to now. I don't get the joy out of it I think I might have otherwise, because
there are still quite a few songs on here that don't have the, because certainly listening to something like All My Happiness Is Gone had a pretty heavy weight to it, I think, even out of context. but certainly within context.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Um, and even the song about his mom is really, really hard to
Hmm.
again, like you wouldn't have to be a fanboy of his, you wouldn't have to know his history and everything to be affected by that.
Yeah, but that's another thing too. In context, uh, the song about his mom, just contrasting that with the relationship that he had with his dad,
Yeah,
that makes that a pretty weighty song as well.
yeah. I mean, he was carrying not just, he's just carrying a heavy, heavy burden.
Hmm.
And if you have any sort of a chemical imbalance in your brain, which I guess saying more and more is not where depression comes from, but let's just say that's unsettled. I mean, he's I imagine he was in a lot of pain. So I don't know. I mean, I would never ask somebody. Anyway, the suicide's the hard part. The
Hmm.
suicide's the hard part, and I think your point and my point is that it does cast a little bit of a pall, or add some gravitas at least to it, but cast kind of a pall over some of it for me. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
sure I will listen to it many more times, but
but there are the great humor. Like there are some, you know his body of work much better than I do,
yeah,
but I can't imagine some of the lines that he has on this
yeah,
album. I can't imagine that they aren't the best that he ever wrote. It just,
yeah. Some of this stuff is way up there for him, for
yeah.
sure.
I mean, as far as like clever, funny, sardonic, it's it just these are some of the best lyrics I've heard in quite some time, I would say.
Yeah, he really wow, at the end there, he was a little bit more reflective or self-reflective, I think, on this than he is on the Silver Jews records. I think he has a much more circumscribed point of view compared to before. Um, I don't know. I again, he always had gravitas. He always had a reason to take him serious, even though he is funny. Like most of these
Mhm.
records have stuff in it that is hilarious. But
Yeah,
you know what I
it's
mean? It's that balance too, to be able to balance that properly. And I think that's the last thing I'll say is that balance is pretty good in the Purple Mountains record as it came out. You know what I mean? If you just take it on its own and separate it from its context, it absolutely has that balance.
how would you describe him as a live performer when you saw him live?
The first time he was uncomfortable. He started to feel a little bit better, but this is a terrible. I don't mean this in a bad way, but he was he genuinely felt it. It felt like he had to really work himself to get into it. This is the show I saw in Columbus, Ohio. But by the end, he was really into it, and I think he organically, once he really loosened up and it literally became great by the end of the night. But it started off very sort of clunky and uncomfortable. At least that's the way I felt about it. And then the show I saw was on the last tour was in San Francisco. It was much more polished. I thought it was a little less interesting than the first show, and not just for the sort of seeing him being uncomfortable. I don't think everybody there was sort of cheering him on. Not, it didn't make anybody uncomfortable. Everybody was sort of trying to give him positive energy, and I feel like it worked. It was a pretty heavy thing. I think he only did like 10 shows then. And
Hmm.
I'm just bougie enough that when I had a chance, I have a friend, one of my oldest friends from college lives there. Um, I had the chance to stay there for free, so I'm like, I'm just gonna fly there and go. Do you have a fly there and go concert? Have you done a fly in just for a show?
I'm not. I've not done that for anything. Like like I'll if I'm gonna go somewhere, I'll try to tie in a lot of stuff. I don't really have flying is not something I've done very often because of the cost prohibitive nature
Yeah,
of it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I have driven to I drove to Columbus from Chicago just to see the Who. That's pretty much all I was there to do.
Yeah. Oh,
I
that's a
didn't mean for
sore.
that to rhyme, but I'm glad it did.
Yeah, I had a chance literally, I think a week ago tonight to see the Who at Madison Square Garden, and I didn't go, and now I'm deeply regretting it. I think in a week they're coming back and playing Long Island, which gives me a chance to redeem myself if I so choose, or if I can, which I hope I can. We shall see. When did you see the Who? Which tour was that?
The Quadrophenia tour, which was in 20, 2015, maybe.
Yeah.
And I also went last year. I went to Columbus just to see Radiohead too. So I've driven good distances just to see a show.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've gone crazy to see anybody. I did fly to see Bob Dylan when he played an outdoor show in Nashville because I'm just that person. I'm like Bob Dylan playing under the Nashville skyline, and I, that was my first Dylan show. I just for my Bob Dylan love, it sort of was at a low boil for a while, and then it just went all over the place, and I felt like, oh my God, I have to see him because I didn't realize he'd make it this far, and so
Mhm.
yeah, I went to see that show, and I mean, it was great, it's absolutely great, but not to steal from David Berman for on behalf of Bob Dylan. I guess he's been talked about enough, but. Um, I'm very sad, but if you, I'm still trying to talk other folks into listening to the record, and then only after that, when they come back and say they like it, do I want to talk about the David Berman story and the Silver Jew stuff.
So going back to the tracks on this, I think for the more the humorous stuff that's on here,
Yeah,
like that's just the way I feel. I think is outstanding. Storyline Fever and Maybe I'm the Only One for Me. I think
yeah,
those are all if anybody listening to this would be worried about this being too heavy from the way that we've been describing it,
true.
uh you won't be disappointed in those songs. Those songs are some of the funniest and greatest lyrics that you'll ever hear.
Yeah, it's up there. His book of poetry was really good too. I'm sure you can get a used copy for pretty cheap. It was legit. It's really, really good. That's really interesting.
Spent time writing in Joshua Tree, California.
I saw that. I wonder if he was in the Nerd Hotel there, the Music Nerd Hotel.
I don't know.
All I'm going to tell you, if you go to the Joshua Tree Hotel,
And Lord knows I should someday.
I know you should. There's a nice little town out there. I think it's called Pioneer Town that gets bands way bigger than you might think, and it's right near Palm Springs too. But
we should do an episode from there.
From the room from the Grand
Yeah.
Parsons Suite.
Yep. We'll say the ghost of Graham Parsons is our guest for that episode.
Yeah, I don't know. Graham's body was taken out in the desert.
Yeah.
He's in the desert. That's the way I choose to see it. The only other thing of a musical around that area is Sonny Bono. You're like, if you go to these I think they even named the Salton Sea like the Sonny Bono Salton Sea wildlife area. Like that's about it.
And by the way, I think I've told you this before, but I'll say it again. So the song "California Desert Party" by Jonathan Richman.
Yeah.
The Graham Parsons funeral. So every time I see California Pizza Kitchen in some form, whether it's like a pizza in the frozen section or if it's an actual restaurant or whatever, I always think California Pizza Kitchen to the tune of California Desert Party.
I love that song. I've seen Jonathan Richman a couple of times. He's really, really.
I have as well. I saw him at Millennium Park. He did a free show at Millennium Park in the pavilion.
I saw him in Madison, Wisconsin, at like a bar. It was very strange.
What year was that?
Wasn't too long ago.
Yeah, I think I might have. I didn't go, but I think that was the same show I was thinking about going to.
Yeah, I went to I can't remember the name of the venue. It was a bar. It was just a bar. And then I saw him in Los Angeles and Hollywood. Both times were great. He was really great. I guess you could maybe throw that in for music in the desert. I mean, you have Calexico, technically, even though I think Calexico, the band, is from Arizona. But
what about your Caius and Queens of the Stone Age?
Yeah, that's all true. All right, there you go. I mean, Graham's still the best part of that story, though. He's still of all that stuff. Although like Inland Empire and all of that, that's starting to get big. I think JJ Fad is from the Inland Empire, if I'm not mistaken.
JJ Fad is devastating. At least they were.
That's probably true.
That was Dr. Dre. That was Dr. Dre's like first commercial success, really.
That song is a banger, Supersonic.
Or that was his first big hit. I'll put it that way, because it's not like NWA or Eazy was not commercially successful, but certainly the first charter for Dr. Dre was JJ Fad.
Yeah, let's see here. I don't think this was not a Dr. Dre production, Supersonic.
It wasn't? Well, it was on Ruthless Records, so I guess I assumed that because of that. But it was on the Jerry Heller Ruthless Records label.
Yeah. It does not list him in. Well, I don't think no more anything.
That's a good job fact checking me, because this didn't even make it out there for public consumption before it got corrected. So that's good.
Yeah. Well, now hold on a minute here. You're gonna have to. I don't know anything more about this shit than you can learn from reading Wikipedia, which is a terrible thing to admit, but. What organic reason do I have to read about JJ Fad? Like it hasn't come up. I'm just being honest here, and I like that song.
Okay, so here it is. I think let's see. Okay, so due to their involvement with Ruthless Records, co-producer credits were added for Dr. Dre and DJ Yella. So I was correct that was what was on the record label, because you know what? I had the record because I was. When I was a kid, I was so into NWA. I had anything that any of them touched, basically.
So let's talk about the Regrets, a band I would have never known about had I not heard from you.
Yeah. So the Regrets new album, How Do You Love, came out a few weeks, like 3 weeks ago now. And their first album was a good one. This is a great one. This is like a band, I think, going from good to great on their second album. And it was one of those things where I listened to it the weekend after it came out, and every song was like, oh, surely that's the best song on this album. And then the next one would be better than the one before. And it was just, one song after another was just like a perfect pop, just jam classic. I think this one is maybe my favorite album of the year. It certainly is to this point, and I think this is where it will end up being. But maybe we don't want to say that, because we might end up talking about our favorites at the year end. But this is just like perfect pop, power pop songwriting, and I think this is the best album that I've heard since the first full length Courtney Barnett album. Sometimes I sit and think, sometimes I just sit. It's my favorite since then, and that's going back a few years now.
If you go to the Regrets made a playlist called "Songs for the Sensitive" on Spotify, and they're like, I don't know how someone their age is being exposed to like the DBs or 2020 or even like Todd Rundgren or Reckless Eric.
That's the whole thing about them. I mean, they had like their first album, they were good beyond their years. This album, they're way beyond their years. I mean,
Yeah.
so we should mention that Linda Knight, the front person of the band, is I think 19 now. She was, I think, 18 when she wrote these songs and recorded them.
Wow.
16 when they did their first album, and she's writing songs that. So she's writing songs that you could almost just picture Darlene Love's or Ronnie Spector singing them. You know, they're like that type of song. And what I think is pretty cool about that is if you think about the girl group songs, you know, it was Carole King and Jerry Goffin writing a lot of them, Phil Spector writing some of them, you know, and they're all coming from the perspective of a teenage girl, whereas here it is a teenage girl actually writing those songs.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not as effusive in my praise for them as you are, as I'm not as big a power pop fan as you are, but you're right, it's the song, having the songs is the difference. Like this, they have the sound and the songs, which is tough to get them both. The fact that she's still that young means something big has to come from her, because yeah, she's definitely come back. So it's a genre that's you know it's certainly been tried before. To come back and find new life in that's pretty uncommon.
It is very uncommon. It doesn't come off as derivative, or you know, we've been down this road a million times. It doesn't come off that way.
I agree.
You would you know, you might read a description of it and think it's going to be that, and it's not. And you know, and yeah, I mean, she's the only thing that I would worry about is that she's already setting the bar pretty high for herself, and so you never know, you know, how that's going to turn out. But the only thing I guess that matters right now is that she's setting the bar very high. I mean, and as far as, so the songs are great, and another thing that's great is I think the band has improved as far as their sound goes. They had a couple of personnel changes between the first album and this one, and so now they have really strong harmonies now that they didn't have so much on the first album, and you know that it's just all the pieces coming together.
Yeah.
But the main thing is these are great songs.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of Erase Errata, who I would say were ahead of their time, although very post-punk in their own way. But they did a sort of a noisier version of pop than a lot of folks did, and they really could pull it off. And of course, I followed them because I think their last album was recorded in Iowa City, which that last Erase Errata album that was recorded in Iowa City is the best thing ever recorded in Iowa City, hands down. Probably the state of Iowa. I can think of nothing. There might be some like garage band masterpiece I'm unaware of, you know, like or like Nuggets era classic that I don't know about. I don't know. I've never heard of any of that. It might be the best thing ever recorded in Iowa. Although I myself have not listened to John Denver in Cedar Rapids, which I think is his last album.
Well, shame on you.
Look, one of these days we're going to end up, it's all going to come out. Like where everybody's eventually going to hear all of your cringeworthy record recommendations, you know, like stuff that it's all going to come out. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm ashamed of liking John Denver.
Nor should you. Nor should you. Yeah, I mean, so we'll get to it at some point.
All
But,
right. It's a little patrician to like John Denver, but I'm a little patrician. At least about that. Yeah. We'll see. I'll put the regrets surely in my top 10. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine. If somehow something tops this, then it's a great year, and I'm thankful for that. But I'm going to guess, that isn't going to happen. But yeah, it just so happens that I as it stands now, and I guess maybe I'm maybe I'm giving away too much that we might use later on. But at this point, the Regrets would be my number one album. The Purple Mountains album would be my number two.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, this has been a pretty good year for music too. Come to think of it, it's not been a bad year at all, especially if you include like reissues and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, really at this point, if I have two albums I like that much in a year, I consider it a good year.
Yeah, there's some other good records this year. The Ride, the second reunion album by Ride, I think is fantastic. We wouldn't know it was a Ride album if you didn't, you can hear a little of it, but it's actually, in light of discussing Slater Kitty, I'll be interested to hear what you think of the Ride record, because they are very deliberate, and they say so in the song, like, we are literally not going to make the same record again. Stop asking us. The song Repetition is great. It might be the greatest record, best song on that record. And when it starts, the first time you hear it, you're going to be like, "What is this?" You will not be able to. That's a Ride record. I guarantee it. I'm going to make this I think it's their second best record of all time. There's a hot take for you.
Okay.
There's a hot take for you. Second best Ride album is this current one.
Okay, we'll have to revisit that, because I haven't listened to it, but I do. Being a Brit pop and that sort of era fan, I do like Ride. So I'm
say shoegaze. Just say
it. Shoegaze.
There you go.
I don't have a problem saying it.
Yeah. I am an unashamed shoegaze fan, like all the way.
So. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. Like I like My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, that is great. I mean, Rides Nowhere is pretty close to perfect. I think Pitchfork gave it a 10 out of 10, but that's because they're yeah, that's a bit of revisionist history, but that record was mighty. I happened to be playing in college radio when Ride was. That's a fond memory there. To have been in college radio while Ride was still a band. That was fun, because you pretty much, especially because the songs started getting longer. That was fun. They were great. Anywho, we will double back for that.
Yeah, we will get back to that.